It's been 3 years since the big trade for Matthew Tkachuk to the Florida Panthers, and the star winger added another ring to his collection.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, July 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube at LO_FLA Panthers. Shout out to everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And 3 times a week during the offseason, starting this week. And Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers, especially on a day like today where it's a big anniversary for the Florida Panthers and Matthew Tkachuk, as it's 3 years since the day that he got traded to the Florida Panthers. We're going to discuss that on the show. We are also going to discuss how the Panthers, how they managed the last month of the regular season and how that is going to change in the future for future teams. And also, is the 1-8 playoff format going to be coming back? We'll explain why later on in the show, based on everything that we are going to discuss, everything on the show today. But yes, 3 years to the day that the Florida Panthers traded for Matthew Tkachuk. It was Matthew Tkachuk and a conditional 4th-round pick in exchange for Jonathan Huberdeau, defenseman MacKenzie Weegar, prospect Cole Schwindt, and a 2025 first-round pick, with which, you think about it, 3 years after the trade, 3 finals appearances for the Panthers, and that pick for the Calgary Flames, which ended up being 32nd overall this year, which ended up being Colin Potter for the Calgary Flames. They finally were able to make that pick, and it's crazy. This is one of those things where you kind of remember where you were when you found out about the trade. I mean, July 22nd, 2022, it was a Friday night. I had a 10-hour shift the very next day at my day job, and as I was falling asleep, I get a missed call from our Wednesday guest host, Jacob Winans, and I'm just like, why is Jacob calling me this late at night on a Friday? I said, okay, fine, I'll call him tomorrow. And something told me to check a group chat or something, and then I see Matthew Tkachuk gets traded to the Florida Panthers, and I checked Twitter to confirm it, and yes, it was true that the Florida Panthers did in fact trade for Matthew Tkachuk, and yes, it was a trade that was very it was criticized to Bill Zito. A lot of people were saying, what is he doing, especially after the trade deadline that he had with getting Claude Giroux, Ben Sherratt, and then those guys walking in free agency, and then you're adding another first-round pick along with it. You're thinking, oh man, this could either go one of two ways, no in between, either really, or it could go right, or it could either go wrong in a certain direction. And luckily for the Panthers, once again, it's resulted in 3 trips to the Stanley Cup Final and 2 championships, and the Florida Panthers brand growing all over South Florida. And you couldn't ask for a better personality representative. I remember doing a episode shortly after the Panthers made that trade for Matthew Tkachuk and just discussing how Matthew Tkachuk has been the net front presence for the Panthers that they have been looking for, something that, as much as I love Jonathan Huberdeau, that he wasn't that, as a guy who was more perimeter based and more of a playmaker, while Matthew Tkachuk, although he's a playmaker himself, especially with how he sets up guys from behind the goal line on the power play. But the fact that he sets screens, he's getting those second chances, getting into the dirty areas, and really that has been really how the Panthers have been able to get those greasy goals, especially in a lot of those late game situations that have helped them get over the top multiple times in these last 3 seasons for the Cats. And I mean, once again, great personality for the Panthers to bring him in. And you think about the marketing for great clips, Raising Cane's after the first championship, the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon after the Four Nations face-off, unapologetically talking in the parade about how the Panthers play and how they are going to continue doing what they're going to do, and putting his body on the line. We talk about the 2023 Stanley Cup Final, how he broke his sternum, and Paul Maurice discussing how he had the biggest of chances in some of those games, despite him being hobbled. And 211 games played in the regular season, 254 points, 88 goals, 156 assists, a Hart Trophy finalist in the first year of him being a Panther. Matthew Tkachuk has been the ultimate catalyst for the Panthers getting to this point, and just the increase of the Panthers and their popularity all over South Florida, and not even just South Florida, but just how they're discussed overall in the NHL landscape of things. And also the sense of maturity that I saw from year one of Matthew Tkachuk all the way till now. I mean, let's not forget, even before the injury, the 10-minute misconducts that he had in the Stanley Cup Final in 2023, where he kind of lost his cool and got two of them even in one game after things separated, and then he knocks the stick out of a player's hand, and then he's sent out of the rink for misconduct. And I mean, he was 22 at the time of the trade. To think that, and as a man, you're not really fully developed mature wise until you're 25, and he's 25 now. So to think that the amount of change and the maturity level that he's had since, and it's all capped off in what's happened this weekend for him in his personal life, getting married to the love of his life, Ellie. So him and his wife Ellie got married this weekend in St. Louis. Now, and adding a third ring, so now 2 championship rings and an actual wedding ring for him. So big congratulations to Matthew Tkachuk. And also, a lot of pictures surfaced from that wedding where you saw some of the players from the first championship for the Florida Panthers, and Brandon Montour, Ryan Lomberg were there. But the best video I saw from that wedding was Keith Tkachuk getting lifted up in the air while Pink Pony Club was playing. So the trolls that the Panthers are doing, have been doing, continues from the celebration to the locker room after they won the cup the second time, to now doing it at Matthew Tkachuk's weddings. Brady got married a few years ago. Now Matthew Tkachuk got his turn, and now the Tkachuk family, it's a tight-knit group. The Hughes brothers were there. The Hayes obviously were there because they're all cousins. So it's all come together. And with that, the day after Matthew Tkachuk got married, he got his day with the cup. And this time last year, Matthew Tkachuk got his day with the cup. I remember the video of Taryn, the sister, drinking out of the cup, and in the very background was the British Open Championship, which, by the way, congratulations to Scotty Scheffler. The run that he's on is currently Tiger-esque, similar to what's gone on in the early 2000s. We're experiencing that in 2025. But back to the hockey. Matthew Tkachuk getting a chance to be back in St. Louis, basically doing the same things from his cup day the previous year, going to the Children's Hospital, starting there. He even said how important it is to start there. As for the kids to get a chance to see the Stanley Cup first, and then getting to go to the fire department, the Brentwood Police Department as well, and taking the picture in the cell with the Stanley Cup, lifting it and giving it a nice little kiss as well. So also good for Matthew Tkachuk that he gets to experience it. And hey, we say that hockey players are superstitious. It's the same thing when it comes to cup celebrations, as Matthew Tkachuk went to a lot of the same places that he did, and also posed some of the same pictures that he did, including the same picture of him with the Stanley Cup, the cigar, a little bit of a different taste in the shirt. The shirt that he had was back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. So Stanley Cup, the championship shirt, cigar, and the Heisman Trophy from the year 2000 from Florida State quarterback Chris Wenke, which I understand a little bit more of the context now with why Chris Wenke's Heisman Trophy is with Matthew Tkachuk, because they trained when the Tkachuks were kids and on football drills. So Chris Wenke was one guy who was very, very close to them, and wanted a little bit of the picture of two just very, very iconic trophies. And once again, congratulations to Matthew Tkachuk. And also, it's so crazy how years from now, when you look back at the third week of July, you think of how many points of celebration that Matthew Tkachuk could have, even if he doesn't win the Stanley Cup in future years. You look at third week of July, the trade, the anniversary, and the 2 days with the cup. So Those are big milestones for Matthew Tkachuk personally and professionally for him. So big congratulations to him. But coming up in segment number 2, we're going to discuss how load management is going to be coming for the Florida Panthers as they've handled how they handled the regular season. It's going to be more load management, but it's only going to get worse with the regular season expanding to 84 games. We'll discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And if you're following the action, why not make it more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. And with how hot the Miami Marlins have been since before the All-Star break and continuing it on after, you might want to look into FanDuel to see what their odds are to make the postseason. And it might not be very high, but it makes for a thrilling second half of the baseball season. And today is the start of NFL training camp. The Dolphins are reporting although the vibes aren't the best right now in Miami Gardens, you could place your bets on the Miami Dolphins for their Super Bowl odds, all on FanDuel. And new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Segment number 2 here on this Tuesday, July 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Tuesday. And we talked about Matthew Tkachuk and his day with the cup, getting married. And listen, we spoke about how Matthew Tkachuk was going to take the time to get evaluated for if/when he is going to get operated, but plans were going to be altered if he decided to do the surgery before the wedding, and who knows if he would have been able to even walk up to the altar to greet his wife at the wedding. So that another reason why there is a little bit of a holdup of the surgery going on for him. And honestly, when friends of his come to his house and look at all the wedding photos of him and Ellie, I'm hope that the first. I'm glad that he didn't get the surgery personally for him, because you don't want the people to look at those photos and say, oh, that's because of the injury that he suffered during the Four Nations face-off. Although that would be a great story, you want that to not be the first conversation point to happen when people look at those photos for him. So once again, congratulations to him. And this is only a milestone, which we hope that he experiences once in his life. So for Panther fans, I hope that there is a little bit of patience for him and not rushing for him to get back. And now things are starting to make sense and putting 2 and 2 together on why there's a little bit of that holdup. But with Matthew Tkachuk's injury, yeah, you saw how the Panthers had to manage things. Yeah, they had their LTIR space that they were able to get Vitek Vanacek, Nico Sturm, Seth Jones, Brad Marchand, all of them back into the mix for the Panthers. And really, the Panthers had to go to the route of managing their roster prior to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And yeah, we saw it even in that second end of a back-to-back in April 5th and 6th, where they did everything they could to try to score on the Ottawa Senators on that Saturday matinee, and they just couldn't get by Anton Forsberg. They got goalied that game and say, okay, a few days prior, they blow that lead against Montreal in the final minute, and then they only get 1 point out of 2. And we were talking about the tiebreakers at the time of that hurting their division chances as well. And it's only going to get the schedule's only going to get tougher with an 84 game regular season. And there's a few things that are going to be going the players' way in 2027. That's going to be an abnormal year, which, funny enough, we've been 2027 being an abnormal year has been our normal since before this year, because 2027 won't be an international year. There won't be a World Cup of Hockey. There won't be an Olympics. But here's the thing. With an 84 games regular season and the fact that ESPN their deal with Major League Baseball is coming to an end after this season, that means the start of the regular season can move up one more week, and it could start October 1st, possibly. So I am manifesting that for the NHL, which they have this deal with ESPN and TNT. I'm not sure what TNT has in the first week of October. They have the playoffs, but that's on the MLB playoffs, but that's on TBS. So TNT will likely have some of that, some of the programming for the NHL likely in that first week of October, and it's going to really help possibly the Stanley Cup Final and hopefully even before mid-June. I mean, the Stanley Cup playoffs used to end in May back then, but really, 2027 is abnormal, which you think about. Baseball is the highest ratings for their All-Star game, better than NBA and NFL, and then the NHL said, the heck with the All-Star game. We are putting an international tournament, which we saw 16.1 views, the viewership for the final between USA and Canada. And here's the thing, with the added schedule for the NHL starting in 2027, it's a little bit of a catch-22. There's going to be more hockey-related revenue, and especially because the 40% of the NHL's revenue is from the gate of people entering the actual buildings. The TV deal is at its lowest percentage of the other sports. So that's going to be a big deal for the NHL in trying to get that revenue up so players can get paid. But that's going to result in a little bit of sacrifice of the body for how much more hits these players are going to take. It's another risk that these players are taking right before the Stanley Cup playoffs. And the amount of and if I know hockey players pride themselves on being the toughest of the tough, getting out there even when they shouldn't, that is going to possibly hurt them and possibly hurt the NHL product going into the postseason, which you think about for what's gone on with the exception of the wild card teams. The real race that we talk about towards the end of the regular season is the top two spots of the wild card and some of those bubble teams trying to chase that final spot. And that is the real big swings when it comes to what's going on towards the end of the regular season. It doesn't really happen 1 through 3 as much as we want it to. So that's another reason why load management is probably going to increase as the years go by. So that's another thing of why I believe that it's only going to go up. This was a conversation that they had on the sheet with Jeff Merrick. Him and Jeff Merrick and Zach Phillips had a conversation about it. So I wanted to discuss a little bit of this and kind of relate it to what the Florida Panthers did. And like I said, copycat league. The Florida Panthers kind of looked at other leagues and see how they managed towards the end of the regular season. And now people are seeing how the Stanley Cup champions manage things towards the end and say, okay, looking at things big picture, I want to emulate that too. It's not only just style of play of dump and chase, hard forecheck, create a screen in front of the goaltender, create second chances, boom, the lamp is lit. So, but it's more than just that. It's also the fact that is of getting the proper rest in order to be fresh during the long 2-month dance that is the Stanley Cup playoffs. But with the fact that load management is going to increase, the NHL might be forced to do something that they have been stubborn to do. What is it? We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment 3 here on this Tuesday, July 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Tuesday. And by the way, if you want to experience Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final again, the Florida Panthers have posted the game on their YouTube page, and there's no commercials. So you can watch it from start to finish, skip all that, and be done watching it in less than an hour and a half. So if you are having a bit of Florida Panthers withdrawals, then you go ahead and rewatch some of that. Also, rewatch some of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast during the summer while you're doing that, as we will continue to be here all throughout. And here's the thing. I truly believe that with the lack of movement in the seeds, especially 1 through 3, and the fact is that this is gonna upset Gary Bettman with how many players are choosing to rest, how the races for the 2-3 spots the playoff series might be set, but some of these 2-3s especially might just come down to who would have home ice or who would not have home ice. And the thing is, that doesn't make for a thrilling end. And I get the intention. There are certain things that are great in theory, but just not great in practice. And once again, this current playoff format is a lot of fans are asking for a change, but the NHL has been stubborn about it. We asked for the NHL to bring back a centralized draft. The NHL Board of Governors voted to keep the NHL entry draft decentralized, all because, and again, this goes back to a conversation that they had on the sheet. They wanted to save around $300,000 during the week of the draft to send their personnel there. Also, the median worth of an NHL franchise is $1.16 billion. You know what $300K is? What percentage of $1.16 billion is? 0.02%. So you're trying to do a decentralized NHL draft to save 0.012 of your franchise's worth. But going back to the playoff format and even the divisions, which 4 divisions versus used to be 3. The intention was great. Putting Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Boston, Canadian teams into the same division as Florida teams, which it helps for snowbirds who are in this region to see their team, and along with, if the teams are winning, which Florida and Tampa Bay have been over the last half decade, it creates for the NHL brand to increase in those markets. But when you're seeing the same matchups every single year, Edmonton, LA, Florida, Tampa, 2 years in a row, as much as I like the rivalry, we've only seen it once in round 2, but multiple times in round 1 over the last few years. And then same thing with Dallas, Colorado, which, man, that is not a first round series. That is a Western Conference final. Panthers versus Hurricanes is not an Eastern Conference final. You could argue that Panthers, New York Rangers, although the Panthers won in 6, you could argue that the Panthers could have won that in 5. That is not an Eastern Conference final, in my opinion. So going back to points from the recent segment, is with load management going to be a thing in the NHL more and more. And it's because of the lack of movement in the seating. It might force the commissioner's office to make a change, which that change is not going to happen soon because the next CBA is agreed upon. So it might not happen until 2030. So just like how they're changing the LTIR rules for the NHL, which now the trade deadline is going to be a dud. And here's where I'm with the NHL on the whole play-in idea. I don't think there should be a play-in. I think the race for the final spots in the wild card is the real play-in. So if you allowed the 9 through 10 seed to get in, then that would make the trade deadline even more of a dud. So create some excitement in your league, which the NHL refuses to listen to their fans when it comes to that. So I believe that if they are to go back to a 1 through 8, the top 2 seeds should be the top 2 division winners, and then have 2 through 8 battle it out for seeding. And then the NHL will each NHL team will look at themselves, hey, we're still fighting for positioning. Some teams won't care about positioning. In this case, the Florida Panthers are one of those teams that don't care. I mean, we saw them win the Stanley Cup, not having home ice at all in any of their series. But if the NFL can change from 2 teams having a first round bye to only 1, then why can't the NHL have the top 2 seeds be division winners? You're still going to have the top seed face the 8th seed, and then 7 face number 2, but you won't see things getting repeated over and over again, because I feel like fans are just growing tired. Yeah, there's a lot of hate for the Bruins, the Lightning, the Leafs, but the Panthers were in the same division as the Carolina Hurricanes, and there's still a lot of hate between a lot of the fans of the Panthers and the Hurricanes going back to the Southeast Division. So why not make that change? Why not go back? And going back to the whole wild card, the loser point makes it a lot harder for teams to really catch up in the standings. So that I'm just puzzled by why the NHL continues to just be so stubborn when it comes to trying to make a change when it comes to that. So listen, we wouldn't want the Panthers' journey to winning 2 Stanley Cups to be any different than how they actually did it. But sometimes you just wonder what it would be if they did have if they did do it through the format of 1 through 8. But with what is coming in the NHL and what the rules currently are and what is going to be changing, I can in my opinion, I kind of see the writing on the wall of what's going to happen. And I think that it's going to be resulting in going back to 1 through 8. And if the noise is loud enough, I think that the league is finally going to listen. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for listening to today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. On tomorrow's edition of the show, we will be bringing back Jacob Winans for another edition of Winans Wednesday to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. So make sure to come back then. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.